Welcome, Kris, to the show. I'm really glad to have you here. You are a leadership expert that you're we just found out, about 30 minutes away from me.
I know.
So this is going to be, it's like, oh, we could have done it in person. Oh no, COVID, can't get close. No. So anyway, why don't you let the audience know about your background and then what you're doing today, because our entrepreneurs need to hear from you.
Absolutely. So hi, I'm Kris Plachy. I'm a leadership coach, and I coach primarily seven-figure female entrepreneurs on all the things related to leading and managing the team, which is the least fun and sexy part about having a business. I have about 25 years of experience in leadership. Started in a startup many, many years ago, right out of college, and kind of worked my way through that system of being a manager and not having a lot of tools or resources being in a startup. And so I sort of just naturally was attracted to learning and training and coaching. And this was a long time ago. Coaching wasn't really quite a thing yet, but I actually took some courses even in the 90s. And my leadership role kept expanding. I took on some training responsibilities, and then I ultimately culminated all of that experience into creating a performance coaching team inside this company of other ops leaders. So there were 6 of us at the time who were responsible for coaching and creating leadership development programs for all of the operational leaders. There's about 4,000 of them. And I was also the co-chair and helped develop all of the content for the organization's women's leadership program. So I just organically was attracted to leadership and learning more about it. And honestly, because I kind of think I had some pretty bad first bosses. And I just developed this belief that if you're going to be in a leadership role, you have this level of responsibility to know who you are and have a level of understanding and self-awareness. And so that's what really pulled me closer and closer to the coaching space. And I studied that. I got my own certifications, got my master's degree in organizational management. And then about 8 years ago, I started my own business.
Well, that's great. So do you spend a fair amount of time with people helping them understand themselves? Sounds like their EQ, or whatever you want to refer to it as.
I do. Yeah, that's at the heart of the challenges that my clients present with. It starts with their own thinking, and their gaps, right? Their lack of understanding, their biases, their challenges with expectations, unspoken expectations that they have of others. Most entrepreneurs, if they don't have a lot of development when it comes to leading and managing, are overwhelmed and frustrated. And I think it's one of the reasons why a lot of businesses fail, is that the people who own them never learn how to harness the talents and strengths and abilities of a team.
Yeah, they're strong in sales, strong in engineering, whatever it might be, and they run off and start a company, and it's like, oh, I'd love my work if I didn't have these employees.
Exactly. If I didn't have to deal with all these people here, why are they here? Why am I paying them?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Why don't they get it? Why don't they get it? And they don't get it. Why? Is it because they're not telling them? How can they get it unless it is explained or trained?
Well, yeah. So I'll answer that actually with my 5 steps, because I do think that's the bottom line. And the primary reason employees don't perform is because A, we've been unclear, and B, there's no accountability. So in order for me to build a team of people, whether I'm talking about 3 people or 200 people who are going to help me achieve what I want in the world, I have to be clear about what I want. So I have to have a very compelling reason or vision for what I'm doing, especially entrepreneurs, because most entrepreneurs have a purpose-driven, service-driven mission of some sort. That's what appealed to them in the first place. So you have to be really clear about what you're creating so that you hire people who want to join you in that. And for startups especially, right? Working in a startup is no joke. That's tough work. So the vision has to be clear. It can evolve, but it has to be clear, right? And then the second thing is I have to know what my values are. And a lot of companies and a lot of people who come out of corporations hear the word values and they hear the word values and they want to shut it off. They want to, that's like old corporate talk, ew, gross. Don't make me talk about my values. But your values are your operating system. And that's how you are making decisions every day. It's how you vet who you want to hire. It's how you get annoyed with people who don't perform. So your values exist whether you express them clearly or not. I like to help my clients get really clear about what they value so that they use them for how they hire and how they fire. And that's well communicated and understood, which feeds into expectations. And you and I both know, David, that the majority of people in businesses typically don't perform, and not because of skill gaps, but because of behaviors.
That's right. So my understanding you correctly, you're going to take the vision, help them craft the vision of where they're going to go. Then you're going to help them do the values of how they do business. And then you're going to drive this into expectations. How do you do we actually do an expectations exercise. I'm interested in comparing notes.
Yeah.
So the expectations piece, because it sounds like you're really helping them avoid assumptions and problems based on the assumptions that why are they doing that routine that so many leaders get stuck in?
You would think that someone who has a master's degree and I pay $100,000 would know not to do that.
Yeah.
Maybe not. I can't speak for that. But yeah, no, so expectations, I think what happens, especially for a lot of people who are very technical, is everything has a process, right? And so, and we tend to, as entrepreneurs, when we first hire, we hire hands. We hire people who can do what we want done. And so a lot of that is a process. It's like a step. These are things that need to be done. But we have to lead people with expectations, which are different. So there's rules and very measurable things, which we have to have for accountability. But then the behaviors, how people do their work, is what we're talking about when we talk about expectations. So when we want to make sure so to me, I like to think about them as an umbrella. So, for example, one of my clients, one of her key expectations is be the good, right? Which sounds kind of abstract, but then she illustrates that with are you always showing up as your impeccable self? Are you always responding to clients in the way that you would want represented both for yourself and the business? Are you modeling the way that we show up in the world in the work that you do every day? And the reason that matters is because people do really weird things at work.
They do?
They do. I've been told. It's alleged, but I have been told. And so if all I have is process, but I don't have expectations for behavior, I don't know how to give you feedback. But if I've set expectations about, demonstrating a focus on solutions and always have each other's back and be professional, which is a pretty basic one, I have room now to say, hey, I want to point out to you that behavior that you demonstrated in the meeting today when you were interrupting, Joyce or David or Carl 12 times, that was not a really great example of being a good member of the team. And let me tell you why. And then we have to learn as leaders how to give that kind of feedback. But until we can, we're going to always be frustrated with people because we just assume they know how to behave in the world like we do. And they don't. People are very different. Their rules of engagement are very different than yours. So expectations creates a level playing field where you can give people a little bit of insight into your mind and what you want from them every day.
How do you advise your clients to follow up on those types of conversations?
Well, I think that everybody should be working with people on their team regularly. This is part of the coaching work I do with all of my clients. So depending on the cadence of your business, that should either be once a week, once every 2 weeks, once a month. And so if I, for example, had to give someone feedback today on not listening, right? And, their distraction, which is affecting their performance, I would follow up on it in the next time we meet with each other and say, okay, let's talk about what we talked about last time. Here's what I've noticed. How's it going for you? I would look for opportunity if I could to give them positive reinforcement and feedback. And then I would also see if they are feeling any different. And, I think a lot of adults don't like to do this. They think other adults should just know, or they think other people don't want to be given feedback, which in often cases is true because we've all been given such terrible feedback in our history. Most people are terrible at it. But in my experience, and in the experience I have with all of my clients, if you want the dream team and you want people who perform at that exceptional level, this is a key to it. It's a superpower. And it's okay if you're uncomfortable with it and you don't know how to do it, but you can learn.
I like the way you call it a superpower. I was with an executive yesterday who they did a survey, and he's relatively new to the team. And the survey came back, over 50% of the employees were saying, hey, I need some feedback. I need to know how I'm doing. Nobody's telling me anything. And so I think that they're open to it. And certainly as you brought it up, you have to, I would assume in your case, you're coaching that skill for these entrepreneurs because they're more, as you mentioned, why do I have this MBA? I'm paying $100,000 and they can't do this simple thing.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And I try to demystify again, because, I have clients who are dentists and, floral shop owners and like insurance company owners, and they don't know how to do this, but they especially since so many of my clients are women, I think a lot of women think they should be good at it. It's just the expectation that women are better communicators, right? That's like they should know what to say, and they don't. And it's a skill and it can be learned. I actually teach people like a whole 5 things to remember when you give feedback, and you fill it in and you practice but eventually it becomes much more conversational. But once you're not afraid to tell anybody anything on your team, it's magic, because then you can correct things, or we can really identify they're not able to correct it. And so they're really not a good fit for this business.
it also sounds like your approach with its process foundation removes the nagging and removes the behind the back complaining.
Yep.
And has a respectful conversation, and then here are the action steps we're going to take type of thing that can be very helpful.
So good. Yeah. I say that a lot. Accountability is talking to, not about.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah. We just talk to people and we tell them what's up. And we do that with grace. We could do that. Yeah. That's the self-awareness piece, right? Because so many people get so upset. Entrepreneurs take poor performance personally, and then they are resentful or angry. And then that comes out in the way they communicate with their team. And that's not effective either.
No. And there are times where the other person is just clueless. They didn't know how to behave otherwise. So you have this 5-step process. If I'm following, we're at vision, we went to values, expectations. What's next?
Next is role clarity. So everybody needs to know what their job is. And again, a lot of entrepreneurs know, right? Like I'm including myself in this, right? You're just like making it work and you get people to help you, quote unquote. They're helping me with marketing. They're helping me with this, right? And first of all, it's very centered on you with help. But as we go from that solopreneur to that entrepreneur space, we have to create a role, and that role supports the business, which means it needs to have clear objectives and clear measurables. I tell my clients all the time, if you are not paying people to achieve a result in your business, I don't know what you're paying them money for. And if you can't measure that result, Again, I don't know what you're paying them money for. So your work with when you hire people is to make sure that their roles are really clear. We know what the key result is, the key objectives are, and the responsibilities of the position. That builds a framework for the question, why'd they do that? Or why aren't they doing what I want them to do? Well, a lot of the time, there's no job description. There's no role clarity. And the last piece to the last step is the measures. Does everybody have clear measures? So KPI, OKR, whatever your language is, every role in a business should have key measurables that speak to the vitality of the role and the contribution it makes, the role makes, not the person, to the business success. And you pull the role out, then we put a body in there, right? We put a human in the role, and the human has goals, which is great. But the role itself should have key measures that are evaluated.
And where do you find in the 5-step process that it's the biggest speed bump for entrepreneurs?
Expectations. Yeah. Once we get like the time speed bump that people resist is the role and the clear measures. It just makes your brain work, and that's painful. And, most of my clients are visionaries. They're not in the weeds type. So talking to someone who's running a multi-million-dollar business about writing a job description for their COO makes them kind of want to throw up, right? Like that sounds like a terrible idea. But once they do it, it's magic, right? Because now everybody knows what's expected of them from a production perspective, and we get the expectations dialed. Now we know what's expected of people from a behavior perspective.
You made a comment early on, and you talked about that you work with 7-figure women entrepreneurs, if I'm remembering correctly. That's a great line. And I think everybody who listened to the podcast from the beginning, they've been wanting to know, tell me more about 7-figure women entrepreneurs. What are those people like? Where are their strengths? Where do they struggle the most, to see how well they would relate to that?
Yeah. So my business, we coach everyone. So I have coaches who support my team, and they work with women who are kind of making their way to that 7-figure mark. The reason I work with them exclusively is the problems and the challenges they face are more complex. So, but if I were to describe my clients, they are visionaries, they are resilient, they are pioneering, they are tough, confident, and yet vulnerable. And one of the reasons that so many women seek me out, especially, I do coach a lot of my clients are very powerful women in their world. But, and I know you see this in your clients, right? There's nowhere for them to go to work out their worry. And I think women have a slightly different dynamic because they're also the mom. And so sometimes women bring mom into work, and they can become a little maternal, and that affects their ability to set boundaries with employees and to hold people accountable. So those are some of the things we also work on that are unique, I think, to women in a way that maybe they aren't to other leaders. But I started working with entrepreneurs several years ago, and I honestly just fell in love with female entrepreneurs because they do a lot to create what they create. And one of the things that's also really cool about a lot of female entrepreneurs is what they give back into that same community of supporting one another and supporting other entrepreneurs to grow. So I feel like, the vision for my business is to prove the power of one thriving woman, because I know that when one woman thrives, that has a huge effect on everybody that touches her life, whether it's at work or in her personal life. And so that's my goal, is to affect as many people as we can through these women.
I love that.
Yeah.
In this time in our nation where we are becoming so fragmented, so much fear, so much isolation. We've got the race issues coming up big time. And one part of that, those issues where there has been a certain amount of whatever term you want to use, white male privilege, whatever. Would you be willing to talk to us a bit to educate us, anybody in the audience, men in the audience who need to understand better how to support women as they're coming up through the ranks, or those real visionaries you got on your team that can go out and get it, or women who are saying, you know, I'm doing X, but I think I can do more.
Yeah.
What should we know that we just don't see?
So good. Oh, I could talk to you about this for days.
Go for it.
You know, my thesis of my work, as I mentioned, was that self-aware leaders are better leaders, and also it's a responsibility. I believe that if you have any level of influence, you have a responsibility to your own self-awareness, because otherwise you're just this instrument in the world, not paying any attention to your impact. And so that has been my primary motivation since I started doing what I do. So when George Floyd was murdered, and this tide, you could just feel this tide, right? Like, this is different. You and I can tell, contemporaries, like, this is different. We're in a different time now than we ever have before. And so I immediately made change. And actually this morning I recorded a podcast because I hired a conscious inclusion advisor to work with all of my clients. And so she's on my team. She advises me, but she's also now available for every client, because entrepreneurs get very little, if any, exposure to diversity and inclusion. And we need it, because I think we have the biggest opportunity to make change. These big, huge businesses that have quote unquote diversity departments, and not to be disparaging to them, but we know that a lot of those are CYA diversity. That's where this all started, right? And we have an opportunity, I think, to completely change the dialogue and the conversation around what it really means to be inclusive, right? So, so I think, to answer your question, what can white men do? My husband and I have been talking a lot about this. And first of all, the fact that we're just talking about it makes me so happy, because we have to be able to, like, I'm hoping there are people who are listening to this, don't just turn it off, like, stay with it. It's uncomfortable, but we can do hard things, right? And what Camille and I talked about this morning on my podcast, she's my advisor, is we just have to see first that there has been a system that has existed, that because you and I both, because we're white, have been in the center of, we didn't even know. And racism has been a thing, but if you believe yourself to be a good and loving person, you didn't think you were a part of the problem. But now we're all realizing, like, okay, wait, I have all this unconscious bias, and I have all this opportunity that other people don't have. And I want to pay, at least for me, I'm like, I want to pay attention. I want to understand. So I'll share with you one example that she shared with me on our podcast today, which was kind of gobsmacking. So she and I have lived very parallel lives. We both went to the same college. We both have twins. Our husbands went to the same college. We actually even lived in the same apartment building. And we know each other now because our daughters play soccer together. She lives here in the area as well, David. So, so we were both in college, and we were talking about the Afro-American Studies course that we both took. And I said, I have to tell you, that was the first time in my life that I sat in a room where I was only one of 3 people that was white. And it was a trip, and it was great and interesting. And that's why I told her, I said, I was thrilled to be there, but it was weird. It was the first time that happened to me. And she said, let me tell you what happened to me. She said, I took that same class and I was angry. She said, because that was the first time in my life I had learned my history, because I didn't learn anything other than Black people were slaves my whole education. And then I come in and I find out we were inventors. and we were soldiers, and we had towns of ours burned down when we started to thrive, right? Like, and then she also said, and I also felt, I've never felt more relaxed in my life. I could just relax.
Yeah.
And so to understand that as a population of white people, that we have centered our whole existence around us. And while we have not been on purpose, but we've still been involved, right? That's the beginning of the conversation, is can you just tell yourself the truth about that? And then what? Then what do we do? Then we learn, right? And that's what I'm on this personal quest, is what do I need to learn? I'm reading, right? I just read White Fragility. Oh, it's a tough one. It was good, right? We have work to do, and it isn't up to, in this case, Black people, to teach us. It is up to us to learn. And so I think, to answer your question, what can we all do? I think we have to be willing to expose ourselves to a lot more of an intellectual diet. We have to open up what we absorb and hear for the first time. Because this is, for people who think this isn't an issue, this is an old issue, this isn't, I just read a post posted by a woman who is married to a white man who has a Black little boy in a town between you and I, right here, who was called the N-word, and he's 6. So we have a long way to go.
Yeah, it is very disappointing how long we have to go. It's been interesting since George Floyd to listen to different talks about race and have some really great people speak candidly about what it's been like to be a Black man in America. And be one guy actually from our church talked about, he works in a hospital, and he worked late one night, and then he came home and there was an accident on the road, and he pulled over and helped out, and then got back in his car. He was still in his scrubs, or whatever you call them. And he started driving, and a cop pulled him over. And he was, he was already dressed, he has ID and whatever. And the cop came over, started talking to him. The cop was reasonably nice, and he quickly figured out, here was a guy who was fine, upstanding citizen, whatever. But there were 3 other cop cars that came and showed up. And he looked, he's like, why are there 4 cop cars here? I mean, you pulled me over for whatever it was. He didn't mention, I don't think, what it was. And then another thing that was very educational for me was a few months ago, as this whole stuff came up, for the first time, and I'm 63, for the first time, I learned and was shocked and embarrassed at our country to hear that at the end of World War II, there was the GI Bill, but the GI Bill only was for whites. And so we had thousands of Black soldiers, and I would assume of other races, but in particular Black soldiers, who did not qualify for the GI Bill. They did not get money to buy a house. They did not get money to go to college. How could that happen? I mean, it's just, so I think it's the country, and what concerns me is how we're being fragmented by fear and judgment, isolation. And I really want to see us to focus on unity. How can we come together? I don't want to focus on being an anti-racist. I want to focus on being someone who wants unity. How do we come together? How do we bring about true, complete, equal opportunity for everyone? And once again, as you said, it's a whole nother day-long conversation.
It is a whole other conversation. I agree. Yeah. I think, I have this visual that came to me while because I felt so overwhelmed, right? Like, where do we begin? And I just had this visual of a parachute, the parachute game. I don't know if you played that as a kid, but everybody holds a parachute and you fly it up and down the ground. And you can't play the game by yourself. Everybody has to hold the parachute, or it's not any fun, right? Yeah. And so I just had this visual of like, okay, I have my part of this parachute, and I know what I will do. And I know that I have a voice and I have a level of influence because of the exposure I have, and I'm going to use that and do what I can to make a difference. This is a marathon. But it begins with telling some truths that I think are very painful for white people to tell. And just allow yourself to just acknowledge that. Nobody has to be like this isn't, to your point, this isn't about blaming. And I'm watching a lot of white people getting mad at white people. Like, okay, whoa, like this isn't helping either. Like, let's just all agree. Yeah, this has been a hot mess. This has been really bad.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. And I think as we go
do.
through the dialogue, there's a certain emphasis that needs to support the Black community, but there also needs to be an emphasis on barriers that have been to women.
Yeah.
In careers, there needs to be an emphasis of other races also, and the situations where there's been, much to a lesser extent, but racism coming from other races towards whites. That's minor, very small compared to, but we want a level playing field.
Yeah.
And I hope that we can come together and have a civil dialogue and piece by piece, put it back together where we can support one another and really work for the common good for everybody. And it'll be to our benefit.
I agree. And I think the core to that is where we started, which is being willing to understand and poke at your own bias. Like, find where you have believed something to be the way that it is, and maybe it isn't. Like, the more you are willing to entertain and challenge your own beliefs, the more you are willing, the more capable you will be to achieve what it is that you've said, right? Like this much more harmonious environment for everybody. It starts within each of us, not outside of us.
Yeah, well, because we could go on for days, this might be a good place to end this podcast. And I would like to ask you, if people want to learn more about how you work with seven-figure women entrepreneurs, and I would assume you probably have a few men scattered in there too. And I do, particularly, not only you're invited, not only your good 5-step system, but also this unique talent you have to really help people understand themselves and build from there. Maybe if it's a little too touchy for them to work on the personal side of understanding themselves, they could start on the career side. And how would they learn more about your services and what you do? Yeah,
so a couple things. I'm certainly on LinkedIn. So for those of you who listen and are on LinkedIn, certainly can find me there at Kris Plachy. And that's Kris with a K, and Plachy is Plachy. I would also direct you to 5stepmanagement.com, and that's where you can find, I've made a quick 10-minute video where I talk about those 5 steps. And then once you do that, we'll be connected. We can do that as well. We're going to be doing the inclusive, conscious inclusion workshop that's coming up. So I think we've started a wait list on that. I don't know when this podcast will drop, but that'll be at inclusiveentrepreneur.com. So there's a couple different ways if you want to get some exposure to my work. And I'm also have a podcast, which is called Lead Your Team. And it's on anywhere you get your podcasts.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for being with us, Kris. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. It was a lovely conversation.